Edward Lucas is a senior fellow at the Centre for European Policy Analysis and a former editor at The Economist who specialises in European and transatlantic security and in Russia. I spoke to him as Keir Starmer and Donald Trump were meeting in the Oval Office, and I began by asking if a second state visit is really the best card that Britain can play with Donald Trump.
I think one has to approach these meetings with a mixture of theatre studies and toddler psychology, and the opportunity of a really nice trip to Royal Palace is the sort of thing that will get Donald Trump's attention. Whether it actually delivers the American security guarantees that we all need to make any ceasefire in Ukraine credible is another matter.
And of course the Russians, as far as we know, have said very clearly no European troops on Ukrainian soil, whether you call them peacekeepers or tripwires or whatever else. We just don't want them there. And I wonder whether President Trump and Keir Starmer or President Macron have the willpower to resist the Russians on that particular red line.
Well, you're right, Matt. That's a huge question. I'm just imagine if we put a tripwire force in round Odessa, for example, that super important Ukrainian port where all the grain comes out from. Are we really willing to go to war with Russia to protect Ukrainian grain shipments? And if we're not, we're saying to Vladimir Putin, come back, help yourself, second, third helpings, cripple Ukraine, send millions of refugees to Europe, humiliate us. Or are we willing to stare him down and say, yes, we're willing to fight for that? I think the real point here is if we weren't willing to fight for Ukraine when they had a chance of winning, why are we willing to fight for Ukraine when we've made them lose? And that is a question that no Western leader really has an answer to.
And we know what Vladimir Putin thinks of the EU, who wants to see it, divided, possibly disappear. But when you hear President Trump saying, as he did this week, that the EU was set up to, quote, screw the United States, it doesn't exactly fill you with confidence that he's going to be better on our behalf. I mean, Britain's behalf and Europe's behalf.
You're absolutely right, Matt. And the way in which Marco Rubio snubbed Kaja Kallas, the EU's effectively foreign minister, is absolutely stunning. And the Europeans, whether they're in the EU or just next to it like we are, we're kind of in the firing line. We're in the vice. The Russians are out to get us from one direction. It looks like the Americans are out to the other. And it's not just the sort of diplomatic and military problems. There's also the feeling that there's a kind of MAGA international, that the people around Trump, and perhaps Trump himself, really support the far right in Germany, the far right in Romania, getting the Tate brothers out of prison in Romania, out of detention, supporting Nigel Farage here in Britain. So there's a kind of ideological attack coming, which is almost reminiscent of the communist ideological attack during the Cold War, except it's coming from not just from the Kremlin, but coming from Washington, D.C. as well.
There's a kind of diplomatic and political muscle memory in any British government about the so-called special relationship. I mean, is it time to actually call it quits and just say it's never been that special in recent years? This is a dangerous route down which we go because it raises expectations. And the combined forces of geography and capriciousness out of the White House pushes Britain, whether it likes it or not, closer to the EU.
Well, the special relationship is a kind of cringeworthy phrase which covers a couple of very important realities. There's very close intelligence cooperation and very close cooperation over nuclear weapons. We rent our Trident missiles from the United States, the thing that still gives Britain its claim to be a sort of global power. Our nuclear deterrent fundamentally depends on American consent. So, and this is why this meeting between Starmer and Trump is so difficult. If Trump wants to, he can yank the rug under Starmer and say, I'm cancelling the nuclear agreement, so goodbye to your nuclear deterrent. He can do all sorts of other things as well, but that is it's a particular problem for Britain. We're joined at the hip with the Americans on these very important things, and if they walk away, we're left sprawling on the ground.
Edward Lucas, thank you very much indeed.